Welcome to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and their journey. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the co-host of this show, and you can check out some of our past interviews. Got lots of great interviews with previous CEOs and entrepreneurs especially from the San Francisco Bay Area, given this series. And I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where my company helps connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects using done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And this episode is brought to you by EO San Francisco, which is the Bay Area chapter of Entrepreneurs Organization, which is a global peer-to-peer network of more than 18,000 influential business owners across 200 chapters, 60 plus countries. And if you're the founder, co-founder, or owner, or controlling shareholder of a company that generates over 7 figures a year in revenue, you want to connect with other like-minded successful entrepreneurs, EO is for you. And the EO San Francisco chapter enables leading entrepreneurs in the Bay Area to learn, grow, and achieve greater success. If you want to learn more, you can go to eonetwork.org/San Francisco. All right, my guest here today is Harold Jurado. He is the owner of Ramenwell, which is a ramen shop in San Francisco. He's a restaurateur, got a long history of working at a lot of different restaurants. He also is the founder of Umami Hottie, which we'll hear about as well, and started his restaurant about a year and a half before the great pandemic set in. So he had a year and a half notice to try and get systems in place before throwing them all out because none of them worked during the pandemic. But first, let's start. So you grew up in Chicago, Harold, and actually, there's a lot of restaurateurs. You hear their story started from like learning a lot from their parents, but your father was actually a doctor and an entrepreneur, and so you learned from him. Your mother's more artistic, but weren't cooking a lot as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Sean. I grew up in Chicago. Probably, the typical kid running around in the streets, playing a lot of sports. And my mom was a cook. She had a restaurant, bakery. So there was no reason for me to cook. Everything was ready made. Everything was on the table. There was always food covered with a piece of paper towel. There's always a pot of rice. And I was always so active and outdoors all the time. But through my mom, who's, an entrepreneur, she had her own place. And my dad, who's a doctor, and he also had his own practice. I realized that for me to get the most out of my life and the most out of, I think, my restlessness, like my ability to, or my need to stand up and get out and keep moving. I felt that being an entrepreneur was right along in my alley, right up my alley.
You mentioned that your mother made artistic cakes, which you felt kind of connected to and inspired by. There were particular cakes that she brought home that you were like, oh my God, that looks amazing. I want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So she was a cook. So like the cook, I think, is the way she was able to feed the community. But then also the cakes is the way that she was able to feed our artistic side. She would create, 3, 4, 5 tier wedding cakes for my sister's wedding. She did 300 plus mini cakes for each guest, plus, the multiple tiered wedding cake in which they sliced, ceremonially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah.
So that's amazing. Like building those multi-tiered wedding cakes. That's not easy to do.
No, it's definitely a feat. Figuring out how to hold the cakes up also while transporting it was probably the hardest part.
Oh, yeah.
I was, early on, I got a taste of being part of that entrepreneur that my mom was by driving the delivery truck around, making and setting up the cakes, and then also just being there and talking to the clients about what they were looking for and what they wanted.
Do you put it together on site, or do you stack this thing and then drive it over?
We would put it together on site, so they would be separate. There would be different pillars that would hold it up, and then kind of like sticks within the cake to hold up the pillars to make sure that it was stable enough to stand up.
Yeah, you got to be an engineer to put those things together.
Yeah, and then there was always a bag of icing just in case someone smushed against it, something happened along the way. Maybe a kid put her finger in the cake. But yeah. You have to be ready for anything, just like nowadays.
So you actually went to a couple different colleges, figured out that kind of corporate life wasn't the fit for you. You knew you wanted to go into the service industry, whether it was nightlife or restaurants or something like that. But what's kind of amusing is you didn't cook much. You went straight to culinary school.
Yeah,
Bit of a leap of faith, I guess.
it was. So I followed the path that I was supposed to. I graduated high school. First year went to Syracuse. Didn't like being in the middle of nowhere. Decided to come back to Chicago and go to DePaul, and realized that it wasn't the environment. It was actually school that I didn't like.
Hmm.
And at that point, I figured, well, what's a way for me to fast track into working with my hands specifically. So I just jumped into culinary school. I figured that if anything, I can use this experience to understand the service industry as a whole. I was afraid that if I did become um, a manager or GM or owner, that I wouldn't understand half of the business, and that it would be as a detriment to myself. So I figured that even if I learned this skill, and even if I learned this part of the business, that it would help me become more whole as I try to become an entrepreneur and open up my own business. And it's proven so.
Yeah. Um, and I'm not familiar with culinary school, but are there like business classes as well for people who want to start a class, start a restaurant?
Uh, Not really. I'd say culinary school in general is just the basics, and
Yeah.
it didn't even cover Asian food much when I was there. It just was 20 plus years ago. So I think that cuisine or those cuisines were on the up and coming. And even if there was business classes, it would be the most simplest. I don't think we've learned how to do a P&L. I think we did learn how to do some inventory, how to cost a dish out. And so at the most simplest of systems, then there was really nothing.
So you started your career working at a restaurant called Japonais in Chicago, and you literally started from intern and you worked your way up, eventually going to work in other locations. But talk a little bit about getting started there.
Yeah, there was a really popular restaurant called Japonais, and I just went in there and I needed to do an internship for school. So they accepted me, and I was on the salad station to start, and it was wild, barely making any money, working 12-hour days, and just what exactly I thought I was going to be getting into. So there was no surprises there. But then when I finished my internship, went back to culinary school, I knew I was going to go back to that company so I can grow. And then little did I know that they were going to open up a second restaurant in New York. And as soon as I got back after culinary school, I started to be groomed to be the sous chef of the new restaurant. So that means going through all the stations and learning every single dish from the ground up, including pastry. Um, and at, and I also put everything down on the computer digitally, which wasn't what they had before.
Yeah,
So
was that pretty cutting edge at the time? Because I
it really was.
I think everyone should work in a restaurant at some point in their career. I waited tables in high school and college, and worked the cashier in a restaurant and delivery. And I think it's such great experience. But back then it was hardly anything was digital. It was very rudimentary digital.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the recipes were pretty simple, and there was nothing. I think everything was written down. I think everybody had their book in front of them, and whenever they needed a recipe, they had to look within their little pocketbook, which was normal. You write down the recipe, you write down steps to create it, and then that's it. But because I felt that they were going to expand to multiple restaurants, and I had to be able to bring all those recipes to somebody else, I didn't want to reinvent the wheel every time I needed to teach somebody how to make a spring roll. So I got my first laptop, 20-pound computer. It was massive. And I brought it with me to work every day. And off the clock, I would take all the recipes and I would type it in. And if there was any um, difference in what we were doing versus what was written down on the master copies, then we would try to figure out where the discrepancy is.
Yeah.
And at that point, yeah, we took that to New York.
So you had the digital version of it to bring to New York. But it's interesting because one, the technology in restaurants have just changed so dramatically in the way
Mhm.
restaurants market themselves and get reviewed and all that kind of stuff. One of my first interviews on this podcast 14 years ago was one of the co-founders of OpenTable, who
Wow.
told this story about like in like the .com era, back then, the idea of like booking a reservation online through a computer was foreign. Everyone called, right?
Yeah.
And they had to actually run. They drove around San Francisco with a Vespa with a computer on the back, and they would go to restaurants and they'd put a computer with a internet line on the host station, because back then host stations didn't have computers, so they had to put one there so they could manage the reservations. But for you, like reflecting on the last 20 years of being in restaurants, how much has technology changed the world of restaurants?
It's still pretty basic in the kitchen. I think technology definitely has made things a lot easier for myself to run a restaurant basically as the only owner. So we utilize technology with, like you said, with the reservations. We do it with invoicing now. We do it with um, everything, all the information that we need to send to the accountant. Um, Basically, I'm able to take a lot off my managers and staff's hands to allow them to focus on the food and the service.
Mm.
I think one of the biggest, besides that was a big jump for me at Japanese, trying to figure out how to digitize everything to make things more consistent. But I think one of the biggest jumps for me was figuring out how to utilize the cloud and Google Sheets, and which I didn't understand until I went to Google and figured out that I don't only have to keep everything on my computer and try to find the different files to share with my staff. Everything can live in the Google Drive, which was foreign to me when I started it, almost 10 years ago. Um, and it just keeps getting better and better, and it makes my life a lot easier.
So we're jumping a little bit ahead of ourselves here,
Yeah.
but this is amusing. So I want to follow along with this. So you ended up, this is years later, you end up opening a restaurant for Google, and you're like opening this restaurant, but you're like asking people about like, how does Google Docs work? Is that tell me, is that what's
Yeah,
happening?
basically, it was part of my training to understand how the culinary teams at Google communicate with each other, and it took a month or two for me to understand what I was doing, because I'm pretty good with fire and knives, but when it comes to anything on the computer, the learning curve is so
Yeah.
steep. It's
Yeah,
really
of course, it makes sense that Google would, if they have their own restaurant on their campus, that they would expect that their tools are being utilized there.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So quite the learning curve for you then.
It's
Yeah.
everything that comes in that's new is still quite the learning curve.
Yeah.
It takes me a lot of effort to understand what's happening, especially because where we are in the Bay Area, everything moves so fast.
Yeah.
There's so many new technologies,
Yeah.
and I barely learned the older technology, and now I have to learn something new.
Right. Right. That's true. All right. So going back, you had worked at Japonais, and then you moved from Las Vegas to New York, where you helped with opening that restaurant there. And at a certain point, you I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it kind of
Okay.
felt like you had a bit of a partying lifestyle. And so ironically, you said, I need to get out of New York. So you go to Las Vegas.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I had the quintessential chef life of just partying a little bit too much. But at that point in New York, I was living check to check still. I didn't understand that as a manager in a big name restaurant that I felt that I should be saving a lot more, but I didn't see that happening. So New York didn't offer that, and I didn't see myself growing there unless it was going to move to a different restaurant, um, and that wouldn't be financially growing. And so, but at that point, I heard that they were opening a new restaurant in Las Vegas, and I wanted to try a different change of scenery. And then so I asked them for a transfer. And um, since I already opened up one restaurant in New York, I felt that it was advantageous for them to allow me to transfer to Las Vegas to help them
And,
open that up.
and Sin City helped curb your partying lifestyle, ironically.
It may be called Sin City, but if you actually want to, go in the casino and gamble and party, it's pretty expensive. So as a resident there, I think most of the residents didn't go on the strip and hang out too much
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
everyone's
Yeah.
partying. So yeah.
You hear that from people who live there. So you work at Japonais in Las Vegas, and I want to hear this story, but you heard about Chef Charlie Trotter, who was kind of a celebrity chef at the time.
Mhm.
He had plans for the new wing of the Venetian Casino and Hotel. And what did you do?
Yeah, my friend was working at Trotter's, studying to be a sommelier, and I knew that he was going to open up a new restaurant in the Venetian, which of course I lived in Vegas already, and my roots are in Chicago, which is where his flagship restaurant is. So I felt that I had an opportunity to work in both at that point, to train in Chicago and then open up Las Vegas whenever that happened. So I went to Chicago to talk to um, the chefs there and to have an interview. And I did a stage, basically a trial run, and they made me taste some food and asked me what did it need. And
Oh,
me being
interesting.
more of, yeah,
So they
me being
give
more
you
of a
they hold off some ingredient or ingredients, and then they say taste this and decide
I
what
don't
it.
know if they held anything off. I think they just wanted my opinion on what it tasted like, the nuances that I could pick up, then also what I felt that it might need.
Oh,
Uh,
that's throwing you under the bus. This is like what we're actually serving to diners, and you have to criticize it.
yeah, yeah. And from the last restaurant, because I was focusing on being a sous chef in the systems and training people more so, I wasn't training myself as much when it came to the food. So so I was good with setting up cooks to be successful, but I was not good at reflecting on what the food was supposed to be like. And
Mm,
that's where the consistency came in of digitizing all the recipes came in. At
mm.
that point, you didn't have to think about what was in it because it was ready to go. But I had no answer. I'm like, I'm not sure what it needs. Maybe more salt, some random,
Yeah.
really, yeah, some random comment. And they're like, I see you're good with, the management part, but we need you to be stronger with the food part. So we need you, if you want this position, you're gonna have to work here for until we open up Las Vegas. So basically I worked there for free for 2 months as as a training stage before I went to Las Vegas. So I got the job, which was my goal.
And how does one develop that your palate? Like, did you just try a lot of different things, and eventually over time you learn what's missing and what needs to be added in?
I think, well, to develop your palate, you just have to keep tasting. Taste everything. Taste something that's burnt. Taste something before it's cooked. Taste something along the way. So that way, your brain starts to make associations of what garlic is like raw, what it's like after it's, softened, what it's like when it's burnt. So it can create a spectrum of those flavors. And that's with everything at that point. And maybe you're not tasting raw duck, but you're tasting duck along the way of its cooking. If it's roasted, maybe you taste it after 30 minutes, an hour, and then when it's ready. Um, and then also through conversation of things to make, I guess, food better and in different cultures as well. Why does so many cultures use lime or vinegar or acidity? Um, and then how is salt used? What are ways to put salt into a dish, from actual salt to fish sauce to miso to soy sauce. So along with all of the tools that we try to put in our toolbox to help food be expressed, there's also mentally ways that we need to associate our palates, and then also palates of others. So if you taste something, you make sure that you have another person taste it and give their opinion, that we can create that association of, oh, this person is from
Yeah.
India. This is why they think this tastes like that, or whatnot. So
Yeah.
it's just a whole web of, I guess, associations of different flavors, and then also different upbringings.
It's that's such a great point about asking people what they think, what would improve it. And I'm sure once you open your own restaurant, in addition to before, I'm sure it became extremely valuable. But it's also hard to like ask someone, especially knowing that people have different preferences and idiosyncrasies of people. Um, how do you incorporate that into your cooking? Being open-minded enough to ask people what they think, while at the same time being mindful that everyone has different preferences.
I think it comes from being humble and not having too much pride. Every A lot of chefs think that they have the final say, but if no one's coming in your store and if no one's buying anything, then maybe you should give some of that, give some of that up. In the beginning, we did have at Ramenwell, we did have um, a dish in which we collaborated with a local barbecue spot to smoke and slowly cook our chashu, which I thought was exceptional. But then enough people came in and didn't understand what we were doing that we had to, change it to something a little bit more traditional. So yeah, I mean, if that is also what helped us grow. We didn't know exactly what we were doing wrong, so we went the old school way and we just printed up comment cards for people to fill out, and then that's how we just got better.
Yeah. So, tell me about, I guess, about 2015, you ended up moving to the Bay Area. We talked about it a little bit before. You ended up
Mhm.
working for Google. What was that like going from Las Vegas, Chicago, New York, to all of a sudden moving to Silicon Valley, which to those who don't know Silicon Valley, it can be a bit of a bedroom community, especially compared to New York, Las Vegas. It just doesn't have wild lifestyle compared to some of those other places.
Yeah, I think one of the issues I had when moving here is that I didn't grow up and I didn't go through, the trenches with a lot of the culinary scene over here. So I don't have as many friends and as many culinary as big of a culinary community as back home. Um, that being said, I wasn't sure how to move forward with the skills that I have, and I felt that maybe another environment change is what I need, and that's obviously a theme. So I just packed up my bags and I moved west and ended up in San Francisco. Um, but I felt I never wanted to open up another restaurant because I had my own in Chicago also, and it failed after a year and a half. So I felt that if I was going to grow or at least try to be somewhat happy in this field, I was going to go corporate.
Mm.
So I applied at Google and got, it's like a 3 round interview, which never really happens in the restaurant. And then um, they saw that I have a noodle background, like ramen. So they asked me to open up their noodle cafe. And at that point, commuting was a little bit tough. I've never been a big commuter, but it was about 2 hours out of my day. But I did end up getting um, benefits such as paid time off, weekends off, nights off. So that was probably the biggest adjustment for myself that I could
And
actually
then
have.
at a certain point in time, you're like, forget this benefit stuff, forget this corporate stuff. I'm going to throw it all out the window and I'm going to start my own ramen shop in San Francisco. So, what was that journey like, starting your own restaurant, especially after, as you said, having done one before that didn't work out?
Yeah, after about 2 years over there, I wasn't making, even though I was working at Google, I wasn't making engineer money, and everything was so expensive out here. It still is. So
Mm.
I figured if I'm ever going to survive out here and not go to another part of the country and try to move again, try to figure out where my place is, then I'm going to have to try my hand at being an entrepreneur, making my own money. Because it doesn't matter if I became an executive chef or open up more cafes for Google. I don't think I would make enough money to uh, to achieve my goals and my dreams. So with that, I felt that. So when I moved out here, I saw a different type of clientele. When I opened up the Noodle Cafe, we had 100 people in line for free food, and everything is free. So they could go to any cafe, they could go to, they can get burgers or pho or anything all across the campus. But they were coming to my cafe, which was, just insightful. And I
Mm.
felt that if I can do that here, I can do that in the Bay Area in general and profit off of it.
Mhm.
So I was able to find an investor who believed in me, and we went forward with opening up our first restaurant.
And what sorts of decisions did you make that were deliberately different from the previous restaurant that you'd opened up?
Oh man, there's so many. There's so many decisions. Um, One, the location. So my restaurant in Chicago was at a building my parents had, which my mom had a restaurant there. We gutted it, outfitted it for myself, but my mom's restaurant didn't do well, and neither did mine. So the most important part for me was location. How do I find a population that I resonate with and that I can actually serve? So that's when we went to the mission. I walking around the mission, I felt that those were my type of people, and that it'd be more in line with what the type of food I'm doing, which is more relaxed and not as refined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you open it and it's got some good buzz right when it opens. What was the first year like?
It had good buzz, I think, because I had a name coming from out of Chicago. Um, but the first year was horrible. The first month and a half, 2 months, we were trying to figure out our place. We were trying to figure out our footing, and we're super busy, but then we weren't there yet, so we got slightly negative reviews, and nobody wants to be reviewed in the first couple weeks of them starting anything. And I
That
mean,
that's such a hard thing about
it
restaurants. It's
is.
like they come out and they review you so early on.
Yeah, it is. It's like working out. And then a couple weeks later, you're like, oh, I don't see any, you're obviously not working out. Or this isn't good. Or, I don't see any improvement. It takes a lot of time. So I feel that if I were, such as a review platform, I would try to give other people or businesses some time to, learn about themselves first.
Yeah.
That being said, after about 2 to 3 months, we had to let go of most of the staff. So at that point, we were making
Because
very, very,
you
we just
had
didn't
to
have
let
enough.
them go because they were not good, or because you were struggling, or what?
We were struggling. We started out with high hopes. Now we had very little money to go around, so I had to cover a lot of the shifts and a lot of the hours.
Mm,
Um, we didn't have. I let go of the GM, let go of the servers and a
mm.
few cooks, and I was there prepping, cooking, managing everything.
In
Um,
retrospect, do you think you overhired when you opened?
I do, yes. Yeah, I felt that. I mean, in retrospect, everything's, looking back at it, we could have built up the people that were there first in a busy state before having so many people to cover it. But
Yeah.
then, like I said, which is like the cart and the horse, we got bad reviews because of bad service, maybe, and then, well, maybe if we had those people in the beginning, we wouldn't have had those issues, and the reviews would have been better, which would have brought more people in, which would have been able to keep those people. So it's a
Right.
weird equation to try to
There's
put
so many
together.
different. I mean, I was talking, interviewed someone else recently. There was a restaurateur, and it is crazy how many different things you need to execute on flawlessly, consistently over time in order for a restaurant to be successful. There, everything, you've got perishable foods, you've got people working with knives and fire in the kitchen, and you got to do it flawlessly every night, night after night. And if someone has a bad night, they immediately run out and they put a 1-star review online, and it
Yeah.
sits there. And I mean, that must just mess with your brain.
It does. All the little decisions. I sometimes sit and I think, well, first of all, I need to bring more people into the fold. I need to bring more of my managers into the fold and give them more responsibility. And I think that's, as an entrepreneur, it's hard for us to let go of a lot of things,
Yeah.
like the littlest things. Like today, I had to go in and restain a piece of the shelving that it just is that we just built, or whatnot. All these little decisions.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was maddening in the beginning, but then decided to, during the pandemic, I decided to start to look out for myself. So I stopped opening up Yelp reviews. I just didn't care anymore. Like Google reviews are they're a lot nicer. So, and I got those alerts. So I looked at those. So that was one of the first steps. Second step was if I do see a review and I'm emotional and I want to type back, I'll type it, I'll delete it, and then I'll tell my manager, hey, um, you should respond to this review, say sorry or say thank you so much for a great review, whichever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the end, yes, all the decisions we have to make, all the little things that, can um, move the needle up or down can be maddening.
So by the time, so you actually said that January 2020, February 2020 were good months for you. It was
Oh, yeah.
actually, I think you'd righted the ship by that point, and then the pandemic hits.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was great. We were becoming profitable. It was amazing. And then we had to shut down. And, and the pandemic hit and everybody shut down. So I couldn't play the victim card, too long. Like, oh, look at me. We are now losing all this money. Because everyone was going through it. So we figured out how can we go through this better for ourselves. So we just kept at it. We pivoted here and there. We just kept trying. I think our grit is
You
what
do takeout and things like that. What did you do?
we did take out. We have a front window that's a pretty large window that we put a piece of plastic in front. We had a speaker that somebody had to speak into, so we could hear it on the inside. We moved our some of our cooking operations closer to the window, so it wasn't so far of a walk.
Mhm.
And then when delivery happened, we were able to pivot to delivery, which was a blessing in disguise because before we never did delivery, and I actually hated people eating a ramen at home because it's not because it could take 45 minutes from the point where it's made, it's waiting for a driver, the driver gets there, you know.
Right.
But now it's about one third of our revenue, so
Hmm.
it's up a lot. Yeah, so you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Um, and then there was a lot of starts and stops after the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, it was like it opened up and then it closed down again. It opened up and closed down again. And that was
Mhm.
really hard. And then it was hard to get people to come back to work also.
So we have so when it came to our staff, um, I think we treated them right when we opened up and we had hours. They it's not like they can get it other places, so we are able to consistently bring our older staff back. And then when it came to the opening up and closing aspect, it was a blessing in disguise for me. Kind of, I think the pandemic was a blessing in disguise for many entrepreneurs, where I was given the PPP money and I had to pay for my staff anyway. So there was no reason for me to be there to serve 10 people, 10 delivery orders when my
Yeah.
staff is there anyway getting paid. So I was able to, for the first time in my life, become an owner and try to step away from the operator side. And then as that grew, my staff grew too, because at that point it was understandable that we weren't making a lot of money, but that the business was steadily growing from 10 or to go orders to 20 to go orders to dining inside, but I have to be 6 feet away. So we only had 20 people dine a night. But that slow growth helped me feel comfortable about my staff taking over those responsibilities for me.
It's almost like a reboot.
Yeah, it was. Yes.
Earlier, like you see that with some restaurants, they do a slow start, like they don't announce that it's open, or they just put it on a social, and they don't do lunch, they just do dinner, or they just do
Mhm.
lunch, or they don't do dinner, or something like that, or they have a very limited number of tables that are available when they're starting out, something along those lines.
Yeah, I think the term that really helped me grow or helped me get through the pandemic was incremental growth. And that's how we've been able to find success.
Yeah. And tell me about Umami Hottie. Where did that come from? But first, explain what it is.
So so Umami Hottie is it started off as a chili oil brand, and now we're moving into Japanese comfort food and retail. So after the restaurant started doing well, last year I started to travel a bit more. It was my 40th birthday, so just wanted to use my passport more than I've ever have. I don't know the last time I actually went out of the country before last year. Um, but then when I came back, of course, the bug, the entrepreneurial bug, I started scratching at it. And somebody reached out to me through social media and said, "Hey, we have these frozen ramens in Canada, and they're doing pretty well. Do you think you could produce something like this in America? I would love to partner with you." At that point, I said to myself, "Yeah, if you guys can do this in Canada, of course we can do this in America." Um, so started with trying to figure out how to produce a complete frozen ramen, heat and eat, for the public. Realized that was super difficult. One, it's frozen, it's heavy. Two, it's super high, high cost. Um, and then three, if I'm doing meat, then I have to get the USDA involved.
Mm.
So I figured, why not start with something a little bit more approachable. So then we took our hot chili oil, which we have made in house since the beginning, um, and we started drawing that up. So then we started to expand on that to 3 SKUs, because after meeting enough people, they said that retail wants to see 3 SKUs when they can. It's a lot easier for them to have a brand that has multiple items instead of just singularly. And then over the year, it's been about a year. It's been, yeah, just about a year right now. Over the year, we're definitely trying to get back into the frozen ramen, trying to figure out if we can find a co-packer for that, and then eventually other items as well. And yeah, that stemmed from figuring out whether we were going to open up another restaurant and double our work basically, or try to create something in which we could scale, hopefully without as much manpower.
You decided to put yourself in a different environment again.
Yeah, it's a different risk.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Harold, it's great hearing your story and sharing it with others. And I'd love to give people some info on where they can learn more about you and check you out and learn about Ramenwell and Umami Hottie.
Yeah, for the restaurant, if you want to order to go or make a reservation, go to ramenwell.com. And for Umami Hottie, if you would like to see what we do or if you'd like to order something for yourself, we will deliver at umamihottie.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks so much, John.
Thanks for listening to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast. This episode is powered by Rise 25. Please subscribe and check out future episodes.